The Meaning of Masonry by L.Wilmshurst, 1922, brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library, Chapter I. The Deeper Symbolism of Freemasonry. Thank you for joining us on this journey of Masonic knowledge and wisdom. If you're passionate about Freemasonry, its teachings, and its rich history, don't miss out on our upcoming audiobooks and content. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update from the Masonic Audiobook Library. Together, we'll explore the profound world of Freemasonry and deepen our understanding of its symbolism and traditions. Subscribe now, and let's continue this enlightening journey together. Candidate proposing to enter Freemasonry has seldom formed any definite idea of the nature of what he is engaging in. Even after his admission, he usually remains quite at a loss to explain satisfactorily what Masonry is and for what purpose his order exists. He finds, indeed, that it is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, but that explanation, whilst true, is but partial and does not carry him very far. For many members of the craft, to be a Mason implies merely connection with a body, which seems to be something combining the natures of a club and a benefit society. They find, of course, a certain religious element in it, but as they are told that religious discussion, which means, of course, sectarian religious discussion, is forbidden in the lodge, they infer that Masonry is not a religious institution, and that its teachings are intended to be merely secondary and supplemental to any religious tenets they may happen to hold. One sometimes hears it remarked that Masonry is not a religion, which in a sense is quite true, and sometimes that it is a secondary or supplementary religion, which is quite untrue. Again, Masonry is often supposed, even by its own members, to be a system of extreme antiquity that was practiced and that has come down in well-nigh its present form from Egyptian, or at least from early Hebrew sources. A view which again possesses the merest modicum of truth. In brief, the vaguest notions obtain about the origin and history of the craft, whilst the still more vital subject of its immediate and present purpose, and of its possibilities, remains almost entirely outside the consciousness of many of its own members. We meet in our lodges regularly. We perform our ceremonial work and repeat our catechetical instruction lectures night after night, with a less or greater degree of intelligence and verbal perfection, and there our work ends, as though the ability to perform this work creditably were the be-all and the end-all of Masonic work. Seldom or never do we employ our lodge meetings for that purpose, for which, quite as much as for ceremonial purposes, they were intended, viz., for expatiating on the mysteries of the craft. And perhaps our neglect to do so is because we have ourselves imperfectly realized what those mysteries are into which our order was primarily formed to introduce us. Yet there exists a large number of brethren who would willingly repair this obvious deficiency, brethren to whose natures Masonry, even in their more limited aspect of it, makes a profound appeal, and who feel their membership of the craft to be a privilege which has brought them into the presence of something greater than they know, and that enshrines a purpose, and that could unfold a message deeper than they at present realize. In a brief address like this, it is hopeless to attempt to deal at all adequately with what I have suggested are deficiencies in our knowledge of the system we belong to. The most one can hope to do is to offer a few hints or clues, which those who so desire may develop for themselves in the privacy of their own thought. For in the last resource, no one can communicate the deeper things in Masonry to another. Every man must discover and learn them for himself, although a friend or brother may be able to conduct him a certain distance on the path of understanding. We know that even the elementary and superficial secrets of the order must not be communicated to unqualified persons, and the reason for this injunction is not so much because those secrets have any special value, but because that silence is intended to be typical of that which applies to the greater, deeper secrets, some of which, for appropriate reasons, must not be communicated, and some of which indeed are not communicable at all, because they transcend the power of communication. It is well to emphasize then, at the outset, that Masonry is a sacramental system, possessing, like all sacraments, an outward and visible side consisting of its ceremonial, its doctrine, and its symbols which we can see and hear, and an inward, intellectual, and spiritual side, which is concealed behind the ceremonial, the doctrine, and the symbols, and which is available only to the Mason who has learned to use his spiritual imagination, and who can appreciate the reality that lies behind the veil of outward symbol. Anyone, of course, can understand the simpler meaning of our symbols, especially with the help of the explanatory lectures, but he may still miss the meaning of the scheme as a vital whole. It is absurd to think that a vast organization like Masonry was ordained merely to teach to grown-up men of the world the symbolical meaning of a few simple builder's tools, or to impress upon us such elementary virtues as temperance and justice. The children in every village school are taught such things, or to enforce such simple principles of morals as brotherly love, which every church and every religion teaches, or as relief, which is practiced quite as much by non-Masons as by us, or of truth, which every infant learns upon its mother's knee. There is surely, too, no need for us to join a secret society to be taught that the volume of the sacred law is a fountain of truth and instruction, or to go through the great and elaborate ceremony of the third degree merely to learn that we have each to die. The craft whose work we are taught to honor with the name of a science, a royal art, has surely some larger end in view than merely inculcating the practice of social virtues common to all the world, and by no means the monopoly of Freemasons. Surely, then, it behoves us to acquaint ourselves with what that larger end consists, to inquire why the fulfillment of that purpose is worthy to be called a science, and to ascertain what are those mysteries to which our doctrine promises we may ultimately attain if we apply ourselves assiduously enough to understanding what Masonry is capable of teaching us. Realizing, then, what Masonry cannot be deemed to be, let us ask what it is. But before answering that question, let me put you in possession of certain facts that will enable you the better to appreciate the answer when I formulate it. In all periods of the world's history, and in every part of the globe, secret orders and societies have existed outside the limits of the official churches for the purpose of teaching what are called the mysteries, for imparting to suitable and prepared minds certain truths of human life, certain instructions about divine things, about the things that belong to our peace, about human nature and human destiny, which it was undesirable to publish to the multitude who would but profane those teachings and apply the esoteric knowledge that was communicated to perverse and perhaps to disastrous ends. These mysteries were formerly taught, we are told, on the highest hills and in the lowest valleys, which is merely a figure of speech for saying, first, that they have been taught in circumstances of the greatest seclusion and secrecy, and secondly, that they have been taught in both advanced and simple forms according to the understanding of their disciples. It is, of course, common knowledge that great secret systems of the mysteries, referred to in our lectures as noble orders of architecture, ye of soul building, existed in the East, in Chaldea, Assyria, Egypt, Greece, Italy, amongst the Hebrews, amongst Mohammedans, and amongst Christians. Even among uncivilized African races they are to be found. All the great teachers of humanity, Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, Moses, Aristotle, Virgil, the author of the Homeric poems, and the great Greek tragedians, along with Street John, Street Paul, and innumerable other great names, were initiates of the sacred mysteries. The form of the teaching communicated has varied considerably from age to age. It has been expressed under different veils, but since the ultimate truth the mysteries aim at teaching is always one and the same, there has always been taught, and can only be taught, one and the same doctrine. What that doctrine was, and still is, we will consider presently so far as we are able to speak of it, and so far as Masonry gives expression to it. For the moment, let me merely say that behind all the official religious systems of the world, and behind all the great moral movements and developments in the history of humanity have stood what St. Paul called the keepers or stewards of the mysteries. From that source, Christianity itself came into the world. From them originated the great school of Kabbalism, that marvelous system of secret oral tradition of the Hebrews, a strong element of which has been introduced into our Masonic system. From them, too, also issued many fraternities and orders, such, for instance, as the Great Orders of Chivalry and of the Rosicrucians, and the School of Spiritual Alchemy. Lastly, from them, too, also issued, in the 17th century, modern speculative Freemasonry, to trace the genesis of the movement, which came into activity some 250 years ago, our rituals and ceremonies having been compiled round about the year 1700, is beyond the purpose of my present remarks. It may merely be stated that the movement itself incorporated the slender ritual and the elementary symbolism that, for centuries previously, had been employed in connection with the medieval building guilds, but it gave to them a far fuller meaning and a far wider scope. It has always been the custom for trade guilds, and even for modern friendly societies, to spiritualize their trades, and to make the tools of their trade point some simple moral. No trade, perhaps, lends itself more readily to such treatment than the builder's trade, but wherever a great industry has flourished, there you will find traces of that industry becoming allegorized, and of the allegory being employed for the simple moral instruction of those who were operative members of the industry. I am acquainted, for instance, with an Egyptian ceremonial system, some 5,000 years old, which taught precisely the same things as Masonry does, but in the terms of shipbuilding instead of in the terms of architecture. But the terms of architecture were employed by those who originated modern Masonry because they were ready to hand, because they were in use among certain trade guilds then in existence, and lastly, because they are extremely effective and significant from the symbolic point of view. All that I wish to emphasize at this stage is that our present system is not one coming from remote antiquity, that there is no direct continuity between us and the Egyptians, or even those ancient Hebrews who built, in the reign of King Solomon, a certain temple at Jerusalem. What is extremely ancient in Freemasonry is the spiritual doctrine concealed within the architectural phraseology. For this doctrine is an elementary form of the doctrine that has been taught in all ages, no matter in what garb it has been expressed. Our own teaching, for instance, recognizes Pythagoras as having undergone numerous initiations in different parts of the world, and as having attained great eminence in the science. Now it is perfectly certain that Pythagoras was not a Mason at all in our present sense of the word, but it is also perfectly certain that Pythagoras was a very highly advanced master in the knowledge of the secret schools of the mysteries, of whose doctrine some small portion is enshrined for us in our Masonic system.